Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 79 of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, the sound that you hear is the sound of a roving Florentine band wandering the streets of Florence, where I am recording this episode of Camera Position. I am nearing the end of my annual visit to Italy, and a visit that this year had as its high point the workshop, my first ever photography workshop in Tuscany with some great photographers in attendance, and I thought I would spend this episode of Camera Position and take a look at a couple of pictures from each of those participants. I was mightily impressed with the quality of work that they accomplished during the workshop and was thrilled by the experience of helping lead them on the workshop's mission, which was to talk about a personal vision, to try and figure out ways in which we can come at photography in our own personal way, despite the fact that we're in the same kinds of locations, and in this particular situation, the countryside and small hill towns of Tuscany. So I know that some of you have seen some of this work on cameraposition.com blog page, where I have posted some slideshows that were completed as a sort of final project for the workshop participants, and I would encourage you to take a look at those. I'll post the links to those in this episode of Camera Position as well, so that you can access those. But I thought I'd take this time to take a look at a couple of images from each photographer, and we'll return to the roadmap for project planning in a future episode of Camera Position, and we'll start taking a look at some tools that we can use, like Adobe Photoshop Lightroom and Apple Aperture, to help us organize our images and be able to do projects like that more efficiently, more easily. So the workshop participants gathered at the beautiful location of Casa Cornacchi, a beautiful countryside estate where we more or less took over the grounds and enjoyed the beautiful ambiance and the great staff there at Casa Cornacchi, and used it as our base of operations. And what we did throughout the first part of the workshop is we spent some time talking about ideas related to personal vision in photography and some basic ideas about photography in general, and looking at things about composition, about relating ideas of space, and relating ideas about the way in which color affects the way we perceive and see images. So jumping right in here with Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie is an interesting photographer in that she comes to the medium with a real interest in the natural world, and spent much of her time not necessarily photographing in the towns and villages that we visited, although she made many photographs there. But I was impressed by the fact that somebody who already has a strong interest in the natural world, a strong interest in the world of nature, of plants, and so forth, ended up making a lot of great photographs of the countryside. I also liked this photograph, which Anne-Marie took from an unusual point of view, an overhead point of view. We visited the production facility of a Pecorino sheep's cheese facility, and had a wonderful lunch there as well. And Anne-Marie took this great photograph of this aged Pecorino cheese, and the repetition of those triangular shapes really held this photograph together for me. So moving on from Anne-Marie, taking a look at a couple of photographs by Amanda. And Amanda, another really interesting photographer, and one who brought along her Lens Baby. Some of you may be familiar with the Lens Baby. It's a sort of way to turn your expensive digital camera or your expensive film camera into a cheap plastic camera. And Amanda did a great job with some of the tools of this Lens Baby and making these sort of dreamlike images. And one of the things I liked about it and her use of the Lens Baby is that she did not just use the lens baby. She used it sparingly and used it when she wanted to create this sort of dreamlike atmosphere within the body of the photograph that she was working on. And not one to leave just the dreamlike atmosphere as the only strategy. Amanda also made this wonderful photograph of these black-clad priests outside of the Duomo, or the cathedral, in Orvieto, a wonderful hill town in Umbria. We visited for the afternoon, and the staccato rhythm of the black and white stripes of the cathedral and the black garb of the priests all works together. Another thing that I thought was really interesting about Amanda's photography is that she tended to crop things to unusual shapes, very long, skinny, tall rectangles, or very long, skinny, long left to right rectangles. And I loved the idea that she wasn't stuck to the notion that one has to have a photograph that's in the classical proportion of 4:3 or whatever it is that the camera produces for you. The next photographer I want to look at is Bud. Now, Bud happens to be a really gifted street photographer, and I've seen a lot of his work over the years, and made a number of photographs of people in their environment. I love the blurred face of this painter in her studio. I thought it was a terrific photograph. But Bud, who recognizes that he's a good street photographer and really loves looking at people and their environments and the interaction of people in those environments, also tried to branch out a bit during our week together in Tuscany and tried to look at structures, at objects in a different way than what he was used to looking at, and spent some time making photographs of buildings, and this lovely photograph of a holy water font in the wonderfully beautiful church of San Biagio in Montepulciano, and made this very beautiful image, taking advantage of some gorgeous light coming through a doorway and cropping this object in such a way that the negative space, the space around the object, becomes as important as the object itself, and really doing a beautiful job with this inanimate object. And so I wanted to applaud Bud for taking a step outside of his own sort of box of making photographs of people and beginning to make some photographs of things that certainly seem to have an evocative quality to them. Photographer Kathy took the opportunity of having a week to concentrate on photography to establish a theme for herself right off the top, and her theme was strength in what remains, and she was really intrigued by the idea of old structures, old objects, old places that have enough strength that continue to remain. And I loved this picture of this sort of one piece of laundry hanging outside the window. There were a lot of photographs made of laundry hanging outside the window, but something about the lonesome quality of this one sort of still dirty piece of laundry hanging outside the window seemed to really work for me. And as a companion piece, this beautiful picture that contrasts this old and rather decrepit building with the new life of plant material that works really quite beautifully, and certainly the compositional element of where those plants are and the way the warm colors draw them to us, or draw our eyes to them, and how Kathy has placed that compositional element in a really beautiful spot. Well, photographer Don had a ton of technical issues and problems during the week. A number of things that went wrong in a variety of different ways, and I felt sad that he wasn't able to accomplish as much work as he might have hoped to have done, but I was really heartened by the fact that Don soldiered through with a final project that consisted of some of the beautiful landscape photographs that he had come to the workshop with on his laptop computer, and certainly the images hearken, at least for me, to the great work of Elliot Porter and his subtle color palette and the idea of swirling and whirling almost abstract color in these images. Photographer Gary really just knocked my socks off. I thought he was really made a ton of photographic progress during the week that we were together, but also just saw things so beautifully. This low camera angle and very, very wide lens, and even though not truly a monochromatic photograph, he has not reduced it to black and white, but the way he's seen it, the way he's cropped it, we wind up with this black and white image that just functions so beautifully and really nicely done. So a really fine image. Gary also spent quite a bit of time walking around the grounds of Casa Cornacchi, our home base, and made some really beautiful photographs of the place, and some beautiful photographs that show not only how wonderful the place was, but also the tranquility of the Tuscan landscape, and using compositional strategies, this idea of three elements, the water, the land, the sky, the three elements of the chairs, and this one wonderfully juxtaposed vertical element of the closed umbrella. Just very nicely seen, and a really sensitive image maker, and I was very impressed with not only the images that he began to make right at the beginning of the workshop, but the way those images changed in terms of sensitivity over time, and recognizing that he had an opportunity to photograph in this place and make these images that were uniquely his own in this place. John photographed lots and lots, and made lots of photographs. I think he was probably the leader in terms of the number of images that he made. I particularly liked this image that he made inside the cathedral in Siena, and light raking across the floor and taking advantage of the time-worn floor of the cathedral in Siena. And then, boy, when I arrived at Casa Cornacchi and saw this orange wagon sort of sitting out at the edge of the landscape, on the edge of the Tuscan vista, I said to myself, boy, there's a photographic subject. I'll bet everyone makes a photograph of that orange wagon. And I believe everybody did, but I think John did probably the best job of really not only telling the story about the orange wagon, but putting the orange wagon in the context of the landscape. John was very interested in using HDR, or high dynamic range photography, and used it very effectively in this particular image of this orange wagon in the misty early morning. You know, one of the worries I had in the workshop was that students would not want to get up very early, but by golly, these participants were up for sunrise almost every morning, and really did a great job of capturing that early morning light, and really did a great job. John did a great job here with this image. Keith did just such a great job all week long, making really, really well-seen images, and I wanted to include a couple of them here. This one, a piece of statuary on top of a very tall pedestal. It's Romulus and Remus, the historical founders of Rome, mythical founders of Rome, suckling at the she-wolf, way up on top of a pedestal, and Keith did a really wonderful job of juxtaposing that statue against sky and against two other statues that are perched way up on top of spires on the cathedral in Siena, and just really looked at this idea of objects with three different heights, three different heights of each object, and throwing the background object slightly out of focus. Really a beautiful job, and I was really impressed by this image, especially because it was a subject that I had photographed a number of times myself and had never really quite gotten at a satisfactory solution. And Keith found this terrific point of view and juxtaposed those three objects in a really beautiful way, looking at the idea that, you know, three things are often a lot more interesting than a single thing, and he did a really wonderful job here with this particular image. Keith and I worked in a similar space, the same space, in Montepulciano one afternoon, and looked at a variety of different ways that we could work with this wall and this coffered ceiling, or vaulted rather ceiling, and looked at the way light was entering the space. And I think he did a really beautiful job with this image, partly because of how he saw everything in this sort of warm tone, and the warm toned floor and the warm toned wall end up almost flattening out against one another because they are in fact the same color, or the same general family of color, and how that flattens out the picture space so that the floor and the wall almost seem to meet on the same plane. I thought a very interesting solution to a dilemma. Roxolana came to the workshop with an interesting background, a background that has included making photographs in the Ukraine of orphans and orphanages, and issues related to political problems within the Ukraine. And here she decided that she wanted to make some photographs that were a little bit more relaxed in terms of the type of photography that she wanted to pursue. And I thought really just it had a sort of interesting strategy. Not all of the photographs that she made during our week together were like this, but I've included two here that are pictures where she found objects to look through. Now, obviously, in terms of relating the idea of depth in a three-dimensional world in a two-dimensional photograph, looking through an object, having some strong foreground object and another background object that is the primary subject, is a great strategy. But Roxolana, I think, really did a great job of looking through objects and seeing compositions within the interesting shapes that she discovered, whether it was a triangle or a circle or this sort of floret kind of a shape. I thought she did just a wonderful job of conveying the sense of three-dimensional space in a two-dimensional image, and perhaps isolating herself away from the subject matter in a way that allowed her to access that subject matter in a better way, to get herself kind of somewhat distanced from the subject by looking at it through an aperture. Roxolana's husband, Vasil, was along for the week during the workshop, and Vasil, Roxolana described him as her Sherpa, who was responsible for lugging her equipment and so forth. But not only was he responsible for that, but also was a pretty sensitive photographer in his own right, primarily shooting with a little point-and-shoot camera, and as Roxolana said at the end of the week, for sure he's going to run out to the store as soon as they get home and buy himself a better camera, because he learned quite a bit about photography during the week. And so in addition to making a final slideshow that was primarily about the work we had done during the week in a sort of comic fashion, Vasil also made some sensitive photographs, and I didn't want to not include his wonderful images, and hope to see him as a full-fledged participant at some future point. I'm really was really delighted to see the work that he did during the week that we were together. And along a similar vein, Marty, the last participant I'll talk about here in this podcast, Marty produced a really terrific body of work during the week of the workshop, but you'd hardly know it from his final presentation. Well, I shouldn't say it that way. What Marty did for his final presentation was make an absolutely delightful sort of recap of our time together, including photographs of all of the students and photographs of me and photographs of some of the people that we met, and my expert and wonderful travel planner Roseanne, who was along with us on the excursion. And but Marty, prior to the time that he produced this final body of work, did just some really beautifully sensitive images. I especially loved the passion and sensitivity displayed in this photograph of the violin player, and the beautiful sense of seeing light and shadow both in the background and in the railing in this stairway picture. And I thought I would include at the very end here this picture that Marty had me pose for toward the end of the workshop. Some of you who are longtime listeners to Camera Position may know that I'm a big fan of these cardboard cutout windows, and I gave every student one at the very beginning of our time together, and we worked on looking at these devices, simple as they are, to help us become better image makers filmmakers to help us become better seers, a device that now the students have dubbed the curtometer. But I thought it was a nice way to end up this group of images. The group of photographers had a terrific time. Obviously, we enjoyed our time together, our companionship. We loved eating the great Italian food and drinking the great Italian wine, but I think mostly we grew as photographers. I know that I did, and I watched all these other student participants grow as photographers as well during the week. So take a look at some of the work that you see in the links on cameraposition.com of some of these great photographers, and take a look at how each one of them approached this notion of photographing many of the same places, many of the same spaces, at exactly the same times, the same time of day, because we were in these places at the same time of day, but how they put their own personal spin on it by bringing their own sense of what it is that they wanted to accomplish to the body of work that they produced during our week together. So that's it for this episode of Camera Position. I wanted to post this before I returned home, and hopefully you've enjoyed some of the unusual sounds coming in from my Florentine window here of the marketplace below the little rooming house where I'm staying. And I hope to see you again on the next episode of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Thanks.